That's our time to start webinar. So Mason. Okay. All right. Ready? I'm gonna sit here. All right. Okay. Ready? Okay. This is our very first webinar, so we appreciate your patience, and for those of you that aren't here with us, I would love to have your feedback about the pros, cons. We're playing around with different cameras and microphones, and we've done a rehearsal and everything, but so let us know, and we're really hoping it goes well. I'm Tracy Brewer. I'm the Executive Director of the Down Syndrome Association of Central Kentucky, and we're going to talk about government waivers today. And we're really happy to have Rachel Jones with us, and Rachel's with bluegrass.org, and I'm going to let them tell you their titles because I probably won't get it right. And then we have Evan Charles, who is with the state, and they're going to go through waivers, what to expect, what it looks like to apply, where you can go to get help. And then I think if you have questions along the way, just go ahead and pipe up and ask your questions. And then for those of you on the webinar, we have the screen pulled up, so if you type your question, we will see it, and they'll see it come up on the screen, and you can get an answer that way. So I'm going to go ahead and let Rachel and Evan get started, and we thank you very much for being with us.
Like Tracy said, my name is Rachel Jones. I'm with bluegrass.org. My official title is Regional Intellectual and Developmental Disability Program Administrator. What that really means is I get to work with people that like to help folks like you. I'm really excited to be here, and just to kind of echo what Tracy said, you know, I have an agenda, and I'll talk to you guys about what my objectives are, but this is really for you all. So please feel free to stop and ask either one of us questions at any point. Because we want to make sure that you get the information out of our presentation, you know, based on what you need. So you can go ahead and get started. All right. So my objectives for today are to make sure that everybody becomes familiar with identifying the eligibility criteria for the different waiver programs. I want for everybody to be able to determine the services by waiver because there are some variances between them. To be able to become more familiar with the application process, and then to get connected with the services that your loved one may need. So we'll talk about a few different Medicaid programs today. The first being the Michelle P. waiver, also the home and community-based waiver, and the supports for community living waiver. How many of you all have some level of familiarity with those? Very good. So there are a few different methods for service delivery available within these waivers, the first being the traditional route. And basically what traditional is where you would utilize approved agencies that Medicaid has certified to provide those services. The consumer-directed or participant-directed route is going to allow more flexibility for families rather than having to utilize those Medicaid-approved agencies. That allows folks the flexibility to actually hire people that they know from out in the community to provide care. And so oftentimes what we see through that program is family members that are paid to provide care. It could be friends, people that folks know from church or from the school system, things like that. It just really allows for maximum flexibility and control over the services. And then, of course, the blended route is just going to be a combination of the two. So oftentimes what we see is folks may attend a day program where they might have a job coach through a traditional agency, and then they would choose to consumer direct maybe personal care or respite or community living supports. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the service definitions here in just a moment. Any questions about those methods for service delivery?
If I may, I kind of feel the need to say something real quick. One thing I was thinking of for today is thinking about what level of familiarity some of you may have. You know, some of you are familiar, some are not. So one thing I thought is a quick illustration is think of Medicaid as, you know, think of it as the goal you're trying to reach. But you've got about, say, 12 to 15 different lanes to get there. And that's what Medicaid does. They divide a lot of things up into little subcategories, and certain people fit certain lanes. And this waiver system is one of those lanes that you can choose. So, you know, as your loved ones, as you look at the system, this lane, this waiver is what you'd be going down in order to try to receive Medicare. Does it seem making more sense with it? Because I gotta tell you, there's a lot of different eligibility ways to get to Medicare. And this is kind of what we're illustrating, one of those paths. Okay. And in that path, we're going to be talking about Rachel does an excellent job of trying to show you all the ins and outs of that particular path. Okay. So that just try to give you a bit better scope of what it is that we're trying to focus on. Okay.
Try to be loud. Okay, then if you want to move us on to the next slide. So the first waiver we wanted to talk about in some detail is the Michelle P. waiver. And in terms of the eligibility criteria, Michelle P. is for folks that have intellectual or developmental disabilities. And what the regulatory language talks about is that folks need to require a protected environment while learning living skills, having educational experiences, learning awareness of their environment. And there's also the necessity that they meet the Medicaid financial eligibility criteria, and we'll touch on that a little bit more. In terms of the process for establishing eligibility, the financial eligibility piece is going to be established through either your local Department for Community-Based Services or Social Security. So folks that draw Social Security income automatically get a Medicaid card. So if prior to applying for waivers, if you already have that, you've already met that requirement, you don't have to make an additional application. However, if, a lot of folks will say, oh, well, my family, our income as a family is too high to access Social Security income. When you meet level of care for waiver, what they do is you would go through the Department for Community-Based Services, so just the local Medicaid office in the county where you live, to make application. And what they do is they waive the family income standard, and they just strictly look at the income of the individual that would be receiving services. So it really drastically opens up the accessibility of Medicaid for folks, kind of like what Evan was talking about just a few minutes ago. So that's the financial piece, and then the medical necessity is established through the Community Mental Health Center in the county where you live, and we'll go through a listing of those here in just a minute. And we have a link to the Michelle P. website that you can click on.
Can I ask a question about the financial part?
Sure.
How exactly, if a family's not going to meet it based on their income, what exactly are those steps?
Okay, her question was if based on your family's income, if you don't necessarily meet eligibility for Medicaid from the financial perspective, what are the steps? And based on who you talk to, your answers are going to vary a little bit. Like Evan was saying, there are a million different routes for how you can go about getting Medicaid. And each family's circumstances are different. But I would say, as a rule, like I said, if you don't meet the SSI eligibility criteria, your next step is going to be to contact folks at your local DCBS office and make application there. And certainly, if you have a denial letter from SSI saying that you don't meet that standard, take that information with you to the DCBS office. On occasion, that can help speed up the process for determining that eligibility.
What if you've done that and they said there's no other option? I mean, that's what I was told.
From the DCBS office,
yeah.
Or well, and like I said, the changing the way that they look at the income standard is dependent upon having that waiver already established. So that could be one of the issues, and I can certainly talk with you one-on-one about that before we leave today. But I would say just don't stop. Keep trying, keep advocating for your child, and eventually when you will find the right door to knock on to get what you need.
Is the disabled adult child card still part of that? Is that?
I'm not familiar with that.
I was told that once you get the denial letter, then you have to apply at DCBS for a disabled adult child card. That then means that they're looking at that child finances, not looking at the family.
Right, and that, yeah, I've not necessarily heard the DAC terminology before, but yeah, like I was saying, when you meet eligibility for the waiver, they just look at the income of the individual that would be receiving services as opposed to the family. So. Did you have a question?
I did. I spoke with someone, I believe in Frankfurt actually, I spoke with someone in Lexington, and they said, we just closed that, you're first on the waiting list. So July 1, I called Frankfurt, I got the confirmation letter we're on the waiting list, and she said, no, you're not number 1, you're 548 on the waiting list.
Oh, wow.
This was July 1. So is there still that kind of a waiting list? I haven't heard anything else.
It's growing really rapidly.
So she was like, and you probably won't qualify when your name comes up. Okay. So this was for Michelle P. Waiver.
Sure. The question was about the waiting list that's been established for Michelle P. and asking about the length of that. I don't have an exact figure, but the last one I heard, I think there were about 3,000 on the waiting list statewide. But it's probably grown since the last time I had contact with folks there.
The problem with Michelle P. Waiver is initially when it was created around 2008, it had about 10,000 slots. And in probably the first 2 years, there was about 3,000, 4,000 folks that signed up, somewhere around that number. Then the next 2 years, it ballooned up really bad. And then all of a sudden, it just got to capacity very quickly upon state government's watching was not able to compensate quite in time. So they've had to develop an emergency waiting list over the last year. They've developed, I think it was 500 additional slots after request from the federal government for those additional funds. Unfortunately, it still continues to basically balloon at a very enormous rate. So we're looking at over probably 11,000 folks right now getting on the waiver within the next 6 months, with 10,000, and with those 500 slots being approved, probably another 500 coming around again next year. They're trying to accommodate basically that balloon in this waiver, and it's becoming very difficult. So.
I kind of feel like, what's the point? Why would I go down and spend days at the Social Security office and go through my DCS or whatever and do all that if I'm number 6,000 on the waiting list for 500 spots? I mean, I have to say, it makes no sense to me to do that.
I was treated very not very.
I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just saying I don't understand why. I don't have any emergency. I didn't get in when the going was good. I just feel like I don't know why I would waste my time. It'd be better spent at work making money that I can still pay for my kids.
Right.
Well, and what we'll talk about when we get around to talking about home and community-based waiver, trying to find some services that there are not a wait list for. So I would think in those particular situations, that would really be your incentive if you wanted to go down that path of pursuing a different waiver other than Michelle P. And we'll get to that here in just a bit.
Sorry.
No.
I don't mean to be negative. It's just.
No, I know. When I first started
Hey,
working.
sign up for this. It's great, but sorry, you'll be number 20,000 on the list.
Sure.
But with it ballooning as big as it is, what's the chances of the state government at some point saying we can't sustain this and we're going to start cutting things back? Is that on anybody's radar?
I'm sure that's been part of discussions. However, there's not going to be nearly the push as there is to retain this waiver. The push to retain this waiver is going to be far greater. So for anybody to have fears about the Michelle P. waiver essentially going away is what I hear from that question. It's not going away.
And
so.
I'm sorry, the waiver is a result of a law.
True.
So it's not, I mean, they have to have it.
Right.
yes. Okay. That was going to be my next point that I made. And for anybody on the webinar that wasn't able to hear that question, it was basically asking what are the chances that, the state looks at the Michelle P. waiver program as being unsustainable and making it go away. And the answer is no, it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. So it should continue to be there, even though the growth is not at the level that we would like to see it be at this point. So, okay, so let's see here. Move on to our next slide. All right, so as we were discussing, there is currently a wait list for services, so that everybody can be familiar with what the process looks like for getting somebody on the wait list. What you'll need to do is contact your local community mental health center, and around the state there are 15 different community mental health centers, and it's just broken up into different counties that each CMHC covers. All of the CMHCs are contracted with the state to do the intake process. So they'll assist with completion of the MAP 621 application, which we will show you guys. So everybody will have an idea about exactly what information is required to provide to the CMHC. It's pretty basic demographic information. It's asking for name, date of birth, If the person already has established Medicaid eligibility, their Medicaid assistance number or Medicaid ID, the information if they have a legal guardian or representative. It's also going to be asking for diagnostic information, so it's important that you be ready to provide that information. So if somebody has mental health conditions, things like depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, things of that nature, those are going to be the Axis 1 diagnoses. Axis 2 is going to be intellectual or developmental disabilities. So if someone has IQ below 70, it's great to have that information, that documentation in front of you so that you can refer back to that if the person that's taking the information has questions. And then physical health conditions are equally as important to mention. So things like asthma, heart disease, Down syndrome would actually fall on Axis 3 as a health condition. And so then also the age that the disability was identified, that information is required to be submitted as well. And then the last part of the MAP 621 application asks about specific services that the individual already receives, and if there are none, that's okay. The CMHC will take all this information down. You can just call and provide it over the phone, and then they'll take care of faxing it into CareWise Health, who currently does the management of that waiting list. So once you've submitted your MAP 621 application, you go on the wait list, and then once your name comes up, then the state will notify you via a letter that says you've been allocated, and so the next step, and also the CMHC will receive a copy of that letter as well. So the next step would be for a staff person from the CMHC to come out and complete MAP 351 assessment to actually determine that medical necessity. So the next few slides that we have, we'll just kind of go through these slowly. We wanted to make sure, I had talked with Tracy about the area that we felt like we were going to be covering.
The form you had up there, is that downloadable from the internet? Do you have to go to the CMHC site to fill that out? Can you just download and fill it out and fax or email it?
You can fax it to the CMHC if you wanted. It actually has to be faxed to CareWise by the CMHC to be official. So it doesn't. It's a contracted situation.
It's a government operation, isn't it?
It is. It is.
The people on the webinar didn't see the
Okay.
form.
All right, we're going to pause for a second and let them take a look at the MAP 621 form. Just let me know when we're ready to move on.
So you can actually get the form without going to the CMHC. You still have to go to the CMHC for them to do it back.
Yes.
Because of the contract that exists between the state and the mental health center.
That makes your head hurt, doesn't it?
For those of you on the webinar, we have links to these forms, so if you want us to email you a link, we can do that after the webinar too, in case you're having trouble seeing them.
All right, so in terms of the areas that the various CMHCs cover, the Bluegrass area covers 17 counties. We've got Anderson, Bourbon, Boyle, Clark, Harrison, Estill, Fayette, Franklin, Garrett, Lincoln, Jessamine, Madison, Mercer, Nicholas, Cowell, Scott, and Woodford. And we've got the phone number there listed. So if you live in any of those counties, that is going to be the contact for submitting that MAP 621 application. All right. The Adonta area is Adair, Casey, Clinton, Cumberland, Greene, McQuarrie, Pulaski, Russell, Taylor, and Wayne. And we also have the contact information for them. The Cumberland River CMHC covers Bell, Clay, Harlan, Jackson, Knox, Laurel, Rockcastle, and Whitley counties. And then we have Kentucky River, who covers Breathitt, Knott, Lee, Leslie, Letcher, Owsley, Perry, and Wolf. All right. So in terms of the covered services with Michelle P. Waiver, case management is exactly what it says it is. The case manager is going to be the person that is responsible for really managing the services, submitting all the paperwork that's necessary to get providers established, making referrals, to see about accessing additional services, things of that nature. Adult day training is going to be for adults, obviously, as the name says. And outcomes for folks that attend adult day training are usually focused on vocational skills, making, social gains in terms of skills that they need there, getting out into the community like that. There are a ton of great day programs out there, and all of the adult day training programs have different focuses. Some are really interested in helping folks explore their creative side. They have really artistic endeavors and things like that. Again, some have a very vocational focus. So there are lots of different types of day programs out there. Adult day healthcare has a little bit more of a medical focus. Again, it's for adults. It would be things like active day. Folks may need more specialized medical care if they're going to be attending an adult day healthcare center. Community living supports is a service that is very individualized. I think the broadest way to describe it is it's individually focused services based on helping the person become more independent. And it can really cover a broad variety of things. It could be helping them improve their ability to care for their hygiene. It could be helping them learn to shop using a list. It could be focused on social skills building, just really whatever the person's needs are. It's probably the most flexible service that's offered under the waivers.
Probably the most used service of DSAC members.
Yeah. Okay. Personal care is for helping folks that are not able to complete age-appropriate hygiene tasks, just somebody to assist them with those types of things. And then homemaking is for folks that live independently that need assistance with managing housekeeping type things. So whether that's banking, getting to the grocery, housekeeping, things like that. And then attendant care is a service that's provided for somebody who has a primary caregiver who works outside the home. It will pay a caregiver to come and provide care while that caregiver is at their job. Questions about any of those services before we move on?
I know, sometimes from Michelle P, we've had, I know I've had some people tell me specifically that you can't list that they were tutoring your child. And then I've had people say it's never been an issue with us. So can you kind of talk about that? Because, a lot of, if you have Michelle P, one of the things you want to do is reinforce what they've learned at school or bring it, home to help with homework and things. So I've always kind of related it to community living support. You have to be able to read, you have to be able to do math to function in your daily life. So we didn't call it tutoring, we called it community living support, semantics. But, just in case there is some confusion there, can you talk a little bit about that?
Evan, you want to take that one?
Sure, no problem. So the way the state has the definition structure of community living supports, that definition is approved by federal government language standards, okay? As we look at this list of services here, personal care, as she mentioned, is tied in more to your activities, day living, personal hygiene, things of that nature. Homemaking has a very specific duty, and then attendant care is just a little bit broader, where it's just relief of that primary caregiver going to work. What we've had to discern here with this, as we look across the state in an auditing perspective, is are we fitting the service definition for community living supports, where we speak to social interaction, social integration, things that the consumer needs in order to try to achieve independence. And with academic instruction, we've had to have a debate, not only internally, but externally with the rest of the state as well, as to what level do we allow academic instruction versus maybe more of your more fundamental needs, such as just simply reading and writing, versus just normal interactions with the community, such as exchanging money for goods and services. So with that, we've had to say, if you're going to use community living supports, it's going to have to be outside of the scope of anything that goes up to the 12th grade level, essentially, for academic instruction. So if you're asking a consumer's employee to work with them on their homework, that's not going to fit the scope of the definition. Therefore, we're kind of out of compliance with the federal government, and we don't want that to happen because that starts jeopardizing the loss of the waiver itself. So with that, we've had to try to shift that to say maybe we could fit that under, say, attendant care or respite, because those two definitions are a lot broader in nature. Okay, so if your aim is to try to help someone try to retain what they're learning at school, it's totally understandable. However, under the current system, we cannot fit that under community living supports. Now, as somebody gets into adulthood, things like that, and we try to try to develop those more remedial things, such as just simply counting money, or maybe trying to read and write, things like that, we might be able to fit that under community living supports because a person's probably not attending school at, say, age 22 or beyond. So we could fit it there. But what we have to be careful with is where do we interact, or where do we overlap, I should say, with what a school system can provide. Okay, if we start overlapping, we start doing some violations, unfortunately. So that's what we have to be very careful with. Okay.
And one of the things that we try to always relay to our consumers on this topic is, when we think about those really fundamental life skills, reading, writing, and arithmetic, how can we relate that back to a broader, and if we can specifically tie a community living support goal, we can usually make that work in a pretty reasonable way. But if it's just strictly homework, and it gets especially sticky with anybody that is school age, as Evan was saying. But again, thinking, can I tie this back to a broader life goal? And if that's the case, there's some flexibility. But I think that as consumers, it's important to remember the interpretation may change over time. And we absolutely see the value in academic success for folks with disability. But we have to make sure that, again, as Evan was saying, that they're staying in compliance with the federal language so that the waiver can continue. All right, any other questions about those services? Okay.
Can I just call to see if we are on the wait list? But I'm not really sure.
Sure.
Okay, just to call and give her information and see if we're on.
For those of you all who are calling in, the question was, is it okay, can I call the state to find out if I'm on the waiting list or not? The most appropriate thing to do would be to contact your community mental health center, and they can call on your behalf and get back to you. My understanding is that is how DMS would like for that to be handled. So.
And we have a list of the regional community health centers.
Yes. Yeah, we actually had gone through those, but if anybody needs for us to go back to those, we can certainly do that. Okay, so as far as other covered services under Michelle P, respite care is available, and that's just any care that's provided to relieve the primary caregiver. There is also supported employment, so you might have heard of job coaches, things of that nature. Services that are focused on helping the person achieve employment out in the community. There are also behavior supports, services that are designed to help caregivers, whether those are paid or unpaid, address challenging behaviors that the participant might be exhibiting. Physical, speech, and occupational therapies are available for adults. Goods and services, those are authorized on a case-by-case basis, and there are some specific items that are not allowable, but that would be something that you could look at pursuing if the person needed therapeutic equipment or something like that wasn't available through other sources. And then also Michelle P can cover environmental modifications up to a $500 limit per calendar year. Questions about those things? All right, so what do you do if you're having trouble accessing services? So if you are already enrolled in the waiver, certainly contact your case manager. And as somebody that has done that job before, I would definitely encourage you, be patient with your case manager. It is a tough job. Usually caseloads are between 30 and 40 participants, and on any given day, a number of those people can be in crisis, and your time gets totally wrapped up in helping that person manage whatever is going on that particular day. They really do have a good heart, and nobody goes into case management for the money. I will assure you of that. So, be patient. If they're not sure about something, give them the opportunity to find out what the answer is for you. But, on the flip side of that, we've all had families that we've worked with or professionals that we've worked with that for whatever reason, our personalities just don't mesh. And that's okay. So, if you find yourself in a situation where your relationship with the case manager is irreparably broken, absolutely contact their supervisor. Let them know, this is the problem that I'm having. Can you help me fix this? If not, is there somebody else that works at your agency that I could start to work with that might be a better fit for me and my family? And if you don't get anywhere at that point, the state is always an option as well. I have contact information listed there for Lyris Cunningham. She is the person that is over the Michelle P. waiver at the state level. She's a really fantastic lady to work with, and she could probably help you with mitigating some conflicts as well. Questions about Michelle P? Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. All right, so the next waiver that we wanted to talk about is the Supports for Community Living waiver. This is a waiver that is for adults, and the admission criteria is laid out in the regulatory language I have listed out there. And very specifically for SEL, folks have to be diagnosed with an intellectual disability in order to be able to access these services. And just like we talked about with Michelle P., there is a dual eligibility with the financial piece for Medicaid as well as the medical necessity. And just the same way that we were talking about with Michelle P., there's also a wait list for SEL services. And I would certainly encourage you parents of younger kiddos, consider getting them on the wait list very early, because as many people are on the Michelle P. wait list, there are that many more on the wait list for SEL, just because it's been in existence longer.
And can I piggyback on that? For a long time, I resisted putting Emily on that because I had in my mind that meant I was signing her up to be in an institution. I don't know why I thought that, but that's what I had in my head. But what was never explained to me and what I needed to know to get her on that list, so I felt comfortable putting her on that list, was if it comes up and your name comes up on that list, which is like 12 years or something like that, it's crazy, and you say, no, we're good with Michelle P. or we're good with HCB or whatever waiver we have, that just means your name goes back to the bottom of the stack. So it's not like it's an either or. You still have options there.
Absolutely.
So, that was never explained to me, and I felt bad putting her on that list.
Sure. Well, and the beauty of SEL is that think of it like Michelle P. waiver's big brother. It offers a lot of the same types of services with the added option of residential supports. But just because you take a spot on SEL does not necessarily mean that you have to utilize residential supports. Folks can still continue to live at home, and just it just expands their options for service delivery. So, and I think that especially as parents of young kiddos, it's hard to think about the future because you're wrapped up in what's happening today. Why won't he eat his carrots? Why won't he agree to go to school? Why won't he do his homework? But we will all reach a point where we become the old feeble ones that need to be cared for. And so I think it's really important to have discussions with your family, with your child's natural supports, to talk about what does your child, what do they want their life to look like when you're not the person that is doing the day-to-day fixing of everything that needs to be fixed. And again, just to really reiterate, Supports for Community Living waiver offers the most options in terms of service delivery. And so, if it was me, if it was my child, I would want to make sure that they had everything at their disposal when I'm not that person that can do the work anymore. And so again, just, I would consider, like Tracy was saying, get them on the waiting list now, because by the time that their name actually comes up, there may be a need at that point. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so like I put mine on about 3 minutes. She's ready for the look. What happens if it's for adults?
Yes.
So what happens by chance at 15 or 17, they call me up and they say, hey, if she's not considered an adult, am I going to go right back down to the bottom of that list?
Actually, no. You can actually still qualify for that waiver should and I was going to illustrate this point here in just a moment. If there are some situations that occur, let's call it natural disasters or family, unfortunate events occur that cause maybe that loved one, that consumer, to be essentially homeless or left unsupervised in that scenario, that they can be bumped up into basically emergency or an urgent status to where they could be allocated that waiver, because what they want to do is make sure that since there's some supports that have gone away for the individual, they want to put services in place to replace what just happened. So they're going to bump that person up in terms of emergency status on that waiting list to
allocate that person. So, for your scenario where you mentioned that 12-year window, that's not a concrete number. Realize that if there is some sort of event that occurs, that the consumer is going to be at a little bit of a loss for who's going to help that person now. This waiting list takes that into consideration and says, we need to reevaluate this person. Maybe they need to be allocated now, and they can bump them up to that. So,
I think the concern is, what if we don't have that emergency? We have a minor, like I get the letter every year. I put my daughter on it when she was born 16 years ago.
right.
And we haven't accessed services yet, so I just keep saying, yeah, keep us on the list.
Right.
But no one's ever called me in years to say, hey, we got some services for you.
Right, and there's a lot of people that are in a category of what you would call futures planning.
Yeah.
So, they're kind of sitting there waiting to say, is there some event that's going to occur that's going to cause that person to say, look, we really need to put services in this person's hands. So that's kind of what they're waiting to see happen, because there's just simply that many people on SEL now.
But when she's an adult, she'll be able to access.
Yes.
Well, right, she'll be able to access that on that more conventional setting. Yes, right.
So then to go back to the original question, if the name comes up before they're an adult and there are no special circumstances, what happens to that person?
Right, they're going to.
Bottom, or they stay where they're at?
I'm sorry, I got lost in the sequence there. So
She turns 15.
she turns 15. Yes.
They call and say she's up.
Right.
Obviously, she doesn't. There's
She's not an
nothing
adult
wrong.
Right.
She's just up.
Now, for that particular scenario, I don't know how they would handle that. I would think it would sound like they might say, okay, we'll just put you on hold still, but I don't know how they would. I would think that you would go ahead and get approved, because you're at the top of that list. You've been put on by according to date. Right. That is my understanding. Right. My understanding is that if you hit 15, you got to the top of that list, despite your circumstance. To my understanding, you will be allocated.
Okay.
I could be wrong. Don't hold me to that, because it's not my particular focus, but to my understanding, you would be allocated.
Okay.
Where will be the confirm?
Well, that would be in order to, the question was, where would you go to confirm such? You could contact a lady by the name of Sheila Davis. Sheila Davis works with Medicaid. She is an administrator over the SCL waiver. And her phone number, actually Lyris and Sheila work pretty much side by side in the Cube world, if you will. So, if you were to get in touch with Lyris, you could just say, can I speak to Sheila for a moment?
And then just another thing to encourage people to go ahead and get on the program. My daughter is almost 15. She has 3 sisters. I never imagined her ever really living outside of family care. She wants to. I mean, she's all ready. I'm moving out. And now I'm a residential manager for staff home. And the homes are so much different than what you think they are.
Yes.
It's completely different. I mean, I manage 3 ladies who live together, and there's situations where there's 3 friends that live together. I mean, so it looks completely different than what I think when you're holding your kid on your hip, you're like, I don't want them doing that. But I really regret not putting her on it when I should have.
I definitely agree. What she was illustrating was, a lot of folks have preconceived notions about what residential supports look like, and what your mind thinks of is an institution, and it's really very far from that. I think a lot of folks would be shocked to know how many staffed residences and group homes are plopped down right in the middle of your very own subdivision, and you don't even know it. And it is, the agencies that provide those residential supports really do a great job of working to match participants, with folks that share their same interests, and things like that, so that the focus is they want their life out in the community to look like anybody else's life out in the community, that they're going to have involvement, that they're going to go out shopping, that they're going to go to church if they want to go to church. It's very focused on ensuring that they have as typical a life as is possible for them.
And they're also branching out to shared living.
Yes.
So, someone, you can explain that maybe a little bit, that it kind of subsidizes the rent for someone to share that space with you.
Yes.
To help you afford a place, and it subsidizes the roommate's rent. Anyway, it was just good, because when I just saw institution was all I saw. So I needed that clarified for me, and it wasn't. So I was late getting home with too, because I was so devastated.
Okay, so as far as determining the eligibility for SDL waiver, the MAP 620 application is the first piece that needs to be submitted with that, so we'll have Finya bring that up. Okay, so this one is a little bit lengthier than the MAP 621 that we looked at. The first information is going to look very similar to the 621 in that it asks for lots of demographics, so name, social security number, Medicaid ID if they have that. Then it also asks for legal guardian or representative information, and signatures are required if they do have a legal guardian in place. And so the next section asks for the diagnostic information, and also if there's a case manager established through Michelle P. or another waiver program, they ask that you list that. If there is no case manager in place, then that section is just left blank. Okay, so the diagnostic information, you'll see there it says physician or SDL IDP signature. If you have a case manager, the chances are pretty great that they have that SDL IDP credential. That just means that you've worked with the SDL waiver and folks with intellectual disabilities for at least a year. And so if you do have a case manager established, they can provide that signature, or your child's primary care physician could provide the physician signature if you chose to do that. I'll scroll on down. Okay, so if there is no legal guardian for the individual, if they've retained all their rights when they became an adult, then the applicant would actually need to sign. We've had some folks in the past, they'll say, well, this person can't read or write. They need to at least make a mark on there, even if it's just an X. They won't. The state would return the application back to the person that sent it if there's no applicant signature and no guardian in place. Okay. The next piece, it just asks for some general information about the applicant, so questions about different areas of functioning and what that looks like for that particular individual. It asks about the level of supervision that they need in order to remain safe. Pretty self-explanatory for the most part. It asks about their health situation, just to make sure that they're stable enough to be able to access SDL services. Behavioral concerns, living arrangements, services that they're currently receiving, services that are anticipated to be needed in the future, what they would like their living situation to look like, and then information about the primary caregiver. And then if there are additional comments, you can certainly add them there. So that's the 620 application. Again, pretty straightforward. That can be mailed in directly to the state at the address listed or faxed in. That does not have to go through the Community Mental Health Center. However, if you need assistance with it, if you get hung up on a question or something like that, the CMHC staff can certainly assist with that. And the other piece that's required, we talked about how SDL waiver is specifically for folks that have an intellectual disability. And so the other piece that's going to be required for submission is psychological testing or IQ testing showing that IQ has been established for that intellectual disability diagnosis. And then also adaptive behavior testing to show how they function. And so questions about the application process? Yes.
I'm not sure at what point the IQ did the testing for establishing the IQ that is later step forward. We have a 1-year-old. I submitted my daughter's school stuff when she turned 8, and they did all her reevaluations at school, and I just submitted all that paperwork that had her IQ tested and everything, and then. So is it a little early for us if he's 1? Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Usually, yes. The question was, at what point should we start looking at IQ testing? When is that typically first done? And then another one of our participants here on site said that she had her daughters submitted from when she was 8 and what was completed through the school. And I think usually, if I'm not mistaken, the first IQ testing is done around that age of 7 or 8, 3rd grade. So certainly if you have that on file, that's great to submit.
What if, parents are refusing IQ testing, so that's a big push nationwide. I don't know about state, but I know that that's kind of
Sure.
a trend right now.
The question was, what if parents are refusing to have IQ testing done? The biggest thing I can say is just that it would limit your access to this particular waiver. But
So even with the diagnosis of Down syndrome, they would not qualify?
not necessarily. There are lots of folks with Down syndrome that function very highly, and so you would need to be able to illustrate that there's that medical necessity that they access those services.
I'm sorry, but just to that point, even for Michelle P., if you have a child that, and I know there's a waiting list right now, but there are children that, may not qualify or have different abilities, and so that IQ test could be the factor in tipping the scale. So I hate IQ tests. I don't think they're accurate. Just get it done. I don't even look at it. I just get it done and I turn it in because it's what they need and it gets for services. So.
All right. Any other questions about that application process or about obtaining testing, things like that? Okay. All right. And so the next slide that we have, this actually kind of goes into what Evan was talking about with crisis situations. What do I do? My family's in crisis. My primary caregiver for my child is in the hospital, or there's been, the death or loss of a caregiver for some reason. I'm just not able to manage behavioral challenges anymore. What do I do? Well, the first thing you would want to do is contact your local community mental health center. We are contracted through the state to provide crisis services. And so if we can go to the next slide there, we can assist you with filling out the emergency application for SEL if there is a need for that individual to be moved to a residential placement or just to dramatically increase the services that are available to them. So let's take a look at that emergency application. All right, so this is a separate application that is submitted on top of the MAP 620 and the psychological testing that we had talked about. And so, again, the questions are pretty straightforward. It asks about very specific details about their current situation. So, you might talk about if it's a situation where there is significant illness of a caregiver or something along those lines, discussing the situation with the caregiver is appropriate, and when you're discussing how a particular arrangement is working. It asks for the guardian information, involvement of other family members, talking about what natural supports are available to the consumer that they could tap into that are not related to their paid services. Health status of a caregiver, again. It asks about what services they're currently receiving, what's been explored. If things that were explored were unsuccessful, it asks why. So it could be an issue. Well, they weren't eligible for this particular program, or they just weren't able to access it because it's a grant, or whatever the situation may be. If there's a situation where an individual has been abused, neglected, or exploited, it asks about what that situation was, the involvement of the APS or CPS workers. If there's been a recent psychiatric hospitalization, information about that. And then it also asks for a statement from the guardian and a statement from the individual, just to ask about what sort of supports they need to be able to remain safe living in the community. And this gets sent into the same folks. And again, if anybody can fill out the emergency application, I think it's best if you have an individual's case manager involved, or if there is no case manager, touch base with the CMHC. They can help with resource linking with that. Questions about that emergency application? And one note about that as well, a lot of times what we see are folks that are coming of age. They have finished school and they're at that sort of transitional period in their life. That seems to be when a lot of crises tend to break off for folks. And so it can be a challenge in the midst of that crisis you know, maybe the last IQ testing that the person had was when they were 15 and now they're 22. And there's, you know, I mean, there's people change a lot over that course of time. So, you know, we can go ahead and submit the emergency form, and then the state may come back and say, well, this testing is 7 or 8 years old. We really need to get new testing completed. That's not the state saying no. That's just the state saying, hey, we need some additional information. We need to verify, you know, what's been done. And again, the community mental health center, the crisis teams can assist with getting those things set up. So, all right. Even if SEL is not in particular what you're looking for to deal with a particular crisis, it's still a great idea to get the intensive case management teams involved from the CMHCs. Sometimes, you know, when you have providers that are involved in a crisis, everybody gets very emotional about things because they think that they're doing what's best. They think that they've already looked at things from every angle, and really they're just too close to the situation to maybe they're overlooking one singular detail that is really sort of the linchpin in everything. And so the intensive case management services can really help provide an additional set of objective eyes, somebody that is not so close to the situation that can maybe identify what is that one thing that we haven't considered yet. They can assist with getting folks set up with additional services, you know, exploring avenues that haven't been already tried. And we certainly don't have magic wands. If we did, man, I'd be a rich lady. I wouldn't be in this, you know, this field of work. But again, it can really be beneficial. And just as far as making that initial contact, you would just call the CMHC, let them know that you're in crisis. Make sure that you say that when you call on the phone, because if you just leave a voicemail, nobody necessarily knows that that's a crisis. So make sure that you state that, and we'll get you connected with services as soon as possible. Okay, so as far as covered services go for supports for community living, we already talked about case management. It's the exact same as what we talked about with Michelle P. It does offer a variety of different residential services in different settings. Some staff residences, those are going to be set up, they're gender specific, so females or males living together. Typically no more than 3 folks living together. There's also group home settings, which are usually multiple staff, and some group homes are group homes where staff live on site with the participants. Other group homes just have staff that rotate in and out. Some are single sex, some are both genders living together, and it's up to 8 participants, right? Okay. And then Tracy had mentioned earlier shared living. This is a new option that came out when they renewed the SEL waiver regs. And as she was saying, basically what shared living does, it allows individuals sort of an alternative to residential supports. It does subsidize the rent and portion of room and board for a caregiver to, and basically what they would do is when a shared living arrangement is agreed upon, the shared living caregiver will agree and say, okay, I have duties X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to make sure that I am available to this participant from the hours of blah, blah, blah to whenever. And so then that person may also receive additional support. So they might have a dog coach, they might go to adult day training, they might have personal assistance services or something like that. But that shared living caregiver is not going to necessarily be paid for anything that they do. It's just that their portion of room and board is covered in exchange for agreeing to provide some level of care to the individual.
So just to try to further illustrate an example here, you know, the consumer may access his services during the day, but maybe during the, excuse me, during the evening, during the overnight, this shared living caregiver takes on those responsibilities. Maybe somebody has a little bit of sleep disturbances, or maybe they have a little bit of a rough nighttime routine, or maybe a rough morning routine, and this shared living caregiver has said, you know what, I'll pick those things up in exchange for living there with individuals. So it helps round out some things that would be available to the person otherwise. So.
And then the consumer chooses their roommate. So you're
Yes.
not placed with somebody; they actually can choose who they want their roommate to be.
Right. Okay, so the next service we have listed is day training. That's basically what we talked about earlier with adult day training, or adult day healthcare can fall under that as well. And then community access. This is a service that is intended to, over time, decrease. It's supposed to help folks with getting out into the community, creating meaningful, natural support type relationships. And so again, it's intended that the caregiver would phase out over time as the individual becomes more independent with accessing those natural supports. Then that caregiver would be needed on a less frequent basis. Personal assistance is another big kind of catch-all support. It's just, whatever that person needs to be able to get through the day can be provided in the home setting or on a limited basis out in the community. Person-centered coaching is a new service that's available as well. Supported employment we talked about. Oh, sorry, I'll slow down. Next slide. There we go. Supported employment, so like job coaching, skills to access community employment. Respite care is available, as well as speech, occupational and physical therapies. And then another new category of services available through SEL is consultative, clinical, and therapeutic services. And this kind of covers a variety of different things. It could be nutrition-based services, psychological services, positive behavior supports, or different things like that. Okay, next one. And then also through supports for community living, you can access funding to pay for community transitions. So if a person decides that they are ready to fly the coop, they're going to move out into their own place, and they need some of those startup costs, support to purchase furniture or make deposits, things like that. It can offer funding for that. It can also pay for transportation that's not otherwise available through natural support or Medicaid, things of that nature. It can help with the purchase of specialized medical equipment. There can be assistance for purchasing environmental modifications. It can also pay for natural supports to attend trainings related to the individual's disability. Can assist with vehicle adaptation cost, as well as purchase of other goods and services. So there's really a lot that you can do with that funding that is not available through other waivers. It's one of the really positive changes when they renewed the regulatory language. Questions about any of those things?
As you see here with the listings of all the services, SCL is definitely very robust. And while you heard Tracy mention about that being on the waiting list, things like that, and a little bit of reservation, I would not have any reservation about placing my loved one on this waiting list, because there is a lot of flexibility with this waiver. This, as she mentioned, Big Brother, this is it right here. So you're going to have a wide variety at your disposal as a consumer. So this is a really good waiver moving forward.
It really is, and again, that's why I think it's important. I just didn't understand all that was available. I just knew one thing, and it was wrong. So that's why I think it's really important to understand, like the adaptations to home. Isn't that like $2,000, like to like if they move out on your own or something like that?
Right, actually,
deposits,
right.
Furniture,
Community Transitions has a limit of those startup costs of $2,000. And it can be utilized to, say, turn on the power, start up your rent deposit, anything of that nature. It can cover a whole lot of things associated with that particular event. The environmental modifications, to my understanding, if I remember correctly, has an $8,000 cap. So if you're looking to, let's say someone, I don't know, becomes wheelchair bound all of a sudden, they need a bathroom modification, this can step in and be supply that money needed for that modification. So.
And I would say the one thing to keep in mind with those is it's for a non-provider owned residence, the environmental modification. If somebody lives in a staff residence or a group home, that provider is responsible for that cost. So this would be if somebody lived independently or lived with family members, that would be available.
Just as a mother with 3 older children, man, I wish that it broke my piggy bank when they moved out into their apartments to be independent.
Right.
With deposits and things like that. So that's a good service to have.
Yeah.
I have a question, and I think it's already been answered. They have to be older before you get them on that list? Like for an infant, you would want to wait? Or would you go ahead and?
I would go ahead and put them on.
Put their name on it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they would just be a lot of the application that you would move blank when you're doing
What would you
that.
do with those parts?
Yeah, like if something's not applicable, you can write that on there. And I think you had mentioned Every year, when you're on the wait list, they will send you a form in the mail to update every single year, and it is vital that you return that so that you will remain on the wait list. And as things change, you'll just update it. So that's how they gather that information.
And the question was, I'll let you repeat it. I don't know if they can hear me very well.
The question was, is there such thing as basically they're being too young to get on the wait list? And from my perspective and Evan's perspective, no. If you have a little one, get them on the SEL waiting list so that when they do have that need, that's going to give them the best chance of having those services available to them. Okay, we're ready to move on to the next slide. We'll talk about methods for service delivery.
Before you go into the other, I have a question from the family that doing the webinar.
Sure.
And it's back to Michelle P. Waiver, but can I go ahead and address that for her?
Absolutely.
Her question is in regards to filing for her taxes. She has the grant, Michelle P. Waiver, and she said she's talked to other families that have it, and she has the waiver and receives personal care income. When she files her taxes, does she get what's withheld? Get that back?
There was an IRS publication. This is a question. The question was about income related to a parent providing care through the consumer-directed option. There was an IRS publication that some folks have been referring to that indicated to them that they were exempt from paying taxes on their income from CDO in very specific circumstances. Let me just preface by saying I am not a tax professional. My suggestion would be, if she is interested in determining exactly whether or not she's exempt from those taxes, she would need to consult her tax professional about that. There is a possibility that she may be. But in terms of, what withholdings they have, the CFC or the AAA that they work with is going to take taxes out based on what that individual lists on their W-4 and K-4. Just their tax forms they fill out just like you have for any other job. So if they feel like they're exempt, they would just need to update that W-4 and K-4 to reflect that they're exempt so that no more taxes would be taken out. But again, I would strongly recommend that they consult a tax professional before making that decision.
And I don't know if people on webinar can hear me, but I have that IRS number, reference, and all that. So whoever that is, can get in contact with me, and I can send them that, the IRS / something. I've got that. It's real technical. I am.
Yeah. Okay, so methods for service delivery. This is very similar to what we talked about with Michelle P. There's the traditional route where you strictly utilize agencies that are approved to provide those services. And those agencies are already certified by Medicaid. And the terminology for consumer-directed option is a little bit different. With SEL, it's referred to as participant-directed services. And probably the biggest difference is that with PDS, there are some restrictions on who can be an employee. If somebody is a family member, an immediate family member, or legally responsible individual, there is an additional approval process that's required for those folks to become employees. And so the form where you submit that information, it's called the MAP 532. So you pull that up. All right, do you want to go over this one, Evan?
All right, so individuals under SCL and wishing to have immediate family members, guardians, or legally responsible individuals has created a section in the regulation where there has to be certain criteria that has to be passed in order for these individuals to be approved as employees. So this form tries to elicit those responses necessary to meet that criteria language. So as we scroll down through the form, we'll notice there's some questions that seem to be fairly specific to yourself as an employee candidate, not necessarily as the consumer's condition. So what we're trying to evaluate is, one, are you the best choice for this individual? And two, at the same breath, are all other choices pale in comparison, in essence? So as you can see here, we ask you to respond to questions of, okay, what type of service are you providing? Because as you saw, there's about 15 some odd that are listed there, about 7 of which are timesheet oriented. So we would ask what particular service you're looking to provide, or services. How do those exceed your normal range of activities with the duties that you'll be providing? So, say for example, you may be cooking a meal, and you probably cook a meal for yourselves, your other family members, and your loved one. But maybe not so typical. You're helping them with some pretty intensive hygiene tasks, or maybe you're helping them with trying to interact with people because they have some behavioral challenges. So you want to illustrate what is beyond your normal range of activity that you would do with your loved one. How can you illustrate cost effectiveness with the service that you'll be providing? A lot of people that access participant-directed services, they may have employees, say for example, paid at say $12, $15, $18 an hour. One example you could throw into this is maybe I only get paid 12 versus what some other people may get paid across the state. Or say for example, keeping this person in the home and me providing this service is going to be better than say residential services because of the cost effectiveness there, or maybe even institution or facility-based care. So we also ask about unique abilities or qualifications. Things that we like to examine there are your particular background. Are you involved in advocacy groups? Have you ever received particular training to care for your loved one, or in that spectrum of care of that diagnosis of that individual? Do you have an educational background that would fit the mold, or even volunteer or job experience that fit the mold? You may have, say for example, driven a bus, working with people in an adult day center. You may have worked in the adult day center. You may have worked in residential. You may have worked even in a nursing home, maybe in a hospital setting. All those things will weigh into consideration for what you may have experienced with vulnerable adults and children. Okay. Just scrolling on down, again, just further evaluation. Particular times of day or times of week that you'll be providing this service. This helps us understand, hey, I'm going to be providing this service when there's other people maybe not available at this particular point in time. So that's a very key point, because a lot of people like to indicate here, well, my loved one's 24/7. Okay, well, virtually everybody's 24/7 in the waiver. We understand that already. We're not weighing the consumer here. We're weighing the individual applying. So when do you think you'll be performing your services at what key times? How's a person limited in independence and community access, and how will your employment improve on their current situation? So this is where you try to basically color the picture that says, I'm standing out from the other people or the other providers. This is what I do versus what other people have done, okay? So that's where you want to make that very clear illustration about that. You might say how you do something with an individual. You know, helping him put his shoes on. I help him with labeling his shoes. I set him in a very particular spot where he can identify exactly where the left and right shoe are, so he can help put them on. That's a very concrete example, so we want to see concrete examples like that. Other sources that you've pursued, and this is where we talk about, again, separation by default. Other choices are simply not going to work. I've tried providers. They don't like traveling up to, say, Lincoln County. You know, they may not want to come out there because of just the travel. They don't want to work with my loved one because of behavioral challenges. Maybe my loved one has extreme medical challenges. It scares people off in terms of employees when they interview. They see G-tube, J-tube catheter care, and they say, I can't do those things. Those things are going to be beyond my scope of ability. Okay, I feel like I'd be liable in those situations. So you may have training of, say, the training release method of care for that individual, and say, other people have that, I have that, I think I'm the better fit. So that's kind of what this form does, is just try to illustrate the immediate family members or guardians or legal responsible people by default being the better choice versus the rest of the field, and just basically what makes that person stand out. So, is there any questions about the 532? All right.
Okay, so we talked about PDF, and the last option is blended. So again, that's going to be a combination of utilizing Medicaid-approved agencies and some participant-directed services. All right. Any other questions about SEL before we move on? Okay. All right. So the home and community-based waiver is the last waiver that we'll talk about today. This waiver has probably the most broad eligibility criteria of all the waivers. It's for the elderly or disabled, those who meet nursing facility level of care, and who without services would be admitted to a nursing facility. And just like we talked about with Michelle P. and SEL, you do have to meet the financial eligibility criteria and medical necessity. And so we have a link to the website there so that you can have that for your reference after you leave today.
One thing I'll mention about the HCB waiver itself, currently there's about 17,000 slots available across the state. It was primarily geared towards the elderly population. However, there are people as young as 6 months old getting on this waiver. So realize that this is going to be a lot more of an all-encompassing waiver for those people who have any sort of disability. It's not going to be obviously for everyone, but it's a lot broader painting than what say Michelle P. or SCL is. So we currently have about 10,000 folks accessing this waiver, maybe 11, somewhere through there. So there's plenty of eligibility at this point. What we like to consider this waiver is kind of the default waiver for choice for people. If they're not able to get into the Michelle P. SCL or another waiver called acquired brain injury, typically you'll see people in this waiver. So if you were to see someone in HCB waiver and they have a brain injury, you're thinking, why wouldn't they be in an acquired brain injury? Well, there's a waiting list obviously for that waiver as well. So they choose this waiver because they can get at least some of the service that they need. So
for our families that could really use Michelle P., but they're going to be on the waiting list, this is your
HCB.
route right now.
Yes.
So then what happens when all these people are on the waiting list from Michelle P. to go down into the HCB and then cap it out?
Well, one of the things to consider is it is a very broad eligibility criteria, but not everybody that would be eligible for Michelle P. They may not meet criteria for HCB. It's hard to say. And I mean, HCB's been open for years and years and years. As long as I've been working in waiver services, which I'm going on 7 years, there's always been availability in HCB. And I would say there's probably also the most turnover in spots because we do have elderly folks accessing HCB waiver services. So they're opening up at a more rapid pace and they're going to be opening up for other waivers. So
I've heard that Michelle P. is capping age, like young kids can't get into it. So I've been sending the majority of my clients through HCB because they're younger, and then saying, HCB, and on the wait list for Michelle P. and move over here.
The statement was about age-related requirements with Michelle P. waiver, and I've not received any official communications about that, and certainly the regulatory language does not speak to age requirements for Michelle P. However, since the wait list has been instituted, the most recent, and this was at this point honestly just rumor mill, I had heard that CareWise Health, which is the agency that's contracted to review all the assessments for level of care, was holding any that had been completed for folks ages 5 and under for Michelle P. because there were questions about the assessment doesn't do a great job of determining what deficits in functioning are related to age and caregiver dependency versus what's related to a disability. And so my understanding was that they were holding those. They were not denying them. They were just not taking any action on them. And as far as when there may be some additional clarity about that, I'm not really sure, again, because there's not been any official communication about that. But
so
just
it'd still be better for the younger kids to go through the HCB.
Yes.
And then get on the waiting list.
If there's an immediate need for services, that HCB is going to be your quickest route.
a couple of things that I'll illustrate here. As she mentioned with the assessment tool, that tool is primarily geared towards adults. It's not geared towards someone, say 5, 4, 6 months, 2 years old. It's not geared towards that. So you're not going to have as concrete information as you would need for evaluation purposes of younger children. The other thing that I wanted to illustrate was, I've lost the point now. Great. What was it? Shoot. I've totally forgotten the point. Oh, I had it on the tip of my tongue. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Come back to you. Yeah, back to you.
That was when we read into the waiting list for Michelle P. We were interested in it because of, go to HCB. Well, I called and I was told, well, you'll have to pay $400 for an assessment. If you don't qualify, you're out that $400. And I was like, well, that's $400 I'll just use for.
And
So and so, I was told they would come out and more than likely he wouldn't qualify. That's what
Just to repeat what her question was, her statement really, she was saying that when she had contacted an agency about completing an HCB assessment, they indicated that if the child did not meet eligibility criteria, they would be charged for that assessment, a pretty hefty fee. I'm going to let you speak to that one.
I have not heard of such a fee trying to be assessed to a person. I think that there's been a conversation here recently about that, that I vaguely remember. I'd have to take that information back and try to research that with my superiors to see what they have to say, because
Is there somebody, you know, in Frankfurt that a family could call to question that? Because I've also had families that have.
sure,
said
I would
that.
suggest, right, I would suggest protection and advocacy on that regard, because I'm not entirely sure I'm not sure if that's considered legitimate.
I know agencies don't get reimbursed $400 for completing an assessment.
Right.
So that,
It is being charged. I did not know that until about a year ago, but I've asked some agencies and they are charging anywhere $250 to $400. If you have Medicaid, Medicaid will cover it, but if you don't have Medicaid or you have a different insurance, then they don't qualify, you're out of pocket for it. So it's not just, that's what families are being told by several different agencies.
I'll definitely have to investigate that, because it's something I'm pretty unfamiliar with.
Is that going to the state or is that going to the contracting agency?
It's going to contracting
The
agency.
agency.
I mean, for us personally, we were charged. We got denied, and I fought the denial. I had doctors and everybody had to think of write letters and I got it, and then we got accepted. A year later, we got that $400 back. We weren't expecting it, so I thought because we were originally denied, and then we got it, and we got that $100 back. So a year later, that was exciting.
Absolutely.
We weren't expecting it.
and we'll have some contact information in a few more slides for the folks that are directly over HCB waiver, so those might be contact points as well.
The point finally hit me. All right, so with the HCB waiver, to speak to your question about would these 3,000 folks on the waiting list or whatever the number is fall into the HCB and start filling those slots up, it is possible, yes. However, a lot of people are probably weighing their situation and saying, is it worth my time to go into the HCB waiver, because the HCB waiver only carries a portion of what is available in the Michelle P waiver. So if you're looking for therapy services, you're not going to get that in HCB waiver. A lot of people are looking for those therapies. You're not going to get that in HCB. So some people are saying, okay, I'll just wait for the Michelle P to open up. So
The reason I send my clients to the waiver program are families that are on private insurance that we need to get to Medicaid. And we've never been able to find an easier way to access Medicaid than to go through the waivers.
right.
Is there an easier way if it's basically these families need to get Medicaid?
Right.
I mean, how do you do it outside of going through the waivers?
Right.
Repeat that question before you.
So the question was, is there an easy way to access these services and going through the waiver, if I heard that correctly, right? Okay. Starting to get out of my scope of work, I'm not entirely sure. I know a lot of people go through the AAAs in order to access that HCB waiver, and they'll get in touch with local DCBS office, determine financial eligibility, go through Social Security office to get declared disabled. I'm not really sure what easier route there might be, unfortunately. Again, just getting outside of my scope of work, unfortunately. So.
And just to clarify, you have to have a waiver to get Medicaid, and you have to have Medicaid to get a waiver. So it's which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So for those that are new to this ballgame, the question is, if I need Medicaid to get a waiver, there's a waiting list for Michelle P. So is HCB the best waiver for me to go through to get Medicaid? So, and it gets confusing, but that's the gist of it.
Okay. We're ready to go back to the presentation. So we talked about the eligibility pieces. And again, the biggest advantage of HCB, though the scope of services available is more limited than the other waivers, there is no wait list. So if you're interested in applying, there are two ways that you can go. If you're interested in utilizing just traditional agencies to provide the care that someone needs, you can contact any participating home health agency. So locally, places that do that are, like, for example, nurses registry, care tenders, often the home health agencies in local counties like MEPCO, WEDCO, places like that are participating, and they can complete those assessments. If folks are interested in the consumer-directed option, then the appropriate contact is going to be the local area agency on aging, and we've got the contact information for these as well. So Bluegrass Area Development District, it's going to be the same counties that are covered by the Bluegrass CMHC. We've got Anderson, Bourbon, Boyle, Clark, Harrison, Estill, Fayette, Franklin, Garrett, Lincoln, Jessamine, Madison, Mercer, Nicholas, Powell, Scott, and Woodford. Okay, the Kentucky River Area Development District covers Breathitt, Knott, Lee, Leslie, Letcher, Owsley, Perry, and Wolf. The Lake Cumberland Area Development District has Adair, Casey, Clinton, Cumberland, Greene, McQuarrie, Pulaski, Russell, Taylor, and Wayne counties. And then the Cumberland Valley Area Development District covers Bell, Clay, Harlan, Jackson, Knox, Laurel, Rockcastle, and Whitley counties. All right, so for covered services with HCB waiver, case management, again, it's pretty much the same thing as we talked about before. The case management, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Evan, but the case management services don't always have to be provided face-to-face with HCB waivers. Some contacts can be made over the phone. So whereas with Michelle P. or SCL, they are required to have eyes-on time with the consumer every single month. HCB is a little bit more fluid in that respect. HCB can also provide some funding for minor home adaptations. Again, that's fairly limited. It can cover adult day healthcare services, so things like an active day service. Homemaking for folks that live independently that need assistance with managing their household affairs. Personal care, again, that's going to be just like it looked with Michelle P., assistance with hygiene-related tasks, things to maintain their health. It covers attendant care, which, just as a reminder, was care provided to the individual while their primary caregiver is working outside the home, and then respite care. And so, you know, we brought up the discussion of HCB waiver as being a route to access Medicaid, and that's fantastic. Medicaid opens a lot of doors for folks that have disabilities. But when you have that, it's also vital that you do access the services that are available through the waiver. I've heard of folks just saying, oh, well, I just need this for the medical card. I don't really need these services. You have to utilize them. Otherwise, you're just taking somebody else's spot. So it's really important that you take the services seriously that are available to you.
And if you don't use it, you won't get your budget renewed the next year, is likely. Is that correct?
There are reasons why folks can be terminated from waivers if you do not access services, and every waiver has a little bit different time frame for that. So yeah, you would risk losing the waiver and therefore the Medicaid eligibility if you chose not to access services.
So I always thought I was being generous, not using everything with Michelle P. because I'm leaving money for other people. Like, I don't need that. I'm going to leave that money even though I'm approved for it. So that's not really the case.
You need to, like, at minimum, like, for example, respite. Respite is not a service that absolutely has to be utilized every single week, but you do have to use it at least every 6 months. So, you know, as long as you're following the plan of care that's been set up. So, for example, if you have community living support set up to be delivered 3 days a week, you want to follow that plan of care, you know, to the best of your ability, utilize the services that have been laid out. You know, if you don't need it, just don't ask for it. But if it's on the plan of care, you want to use it and follow the plan of care that's been established.
Will this cover something like a child development center? You know, I'm talking about
Like daycare services.
Well, I guess it is considered daycare. I was thinking like the Bluegrass Child Development Center where they have therapy, they have typical and special needs children together, and it's a day on. I think it's full time in the Bluegrass one, but I'm just wondering if that's something that's covered.
I don't think that would be a covered
They have to be
service.
considered a Medicaid provider to fall under a certain category of the services that are available. Something tells me that they don't. I'm not certain, but I got a good idea.
And with HCB,
Right.
attendant care, it has to be one-on-one.
Correct.
Right, yeah.
So the question was, would HCB cover services that might be considered childcare, daycare, things like that? And it's very questionable. Is that right? I'm saying that right?
There's no, like, specifically for children, there's no children's day habilitation built into HCB waivers. So there may be other avenues with Medicaid, like where they could just bill Medicaid directly for example, like the therapy portions of those services. But as far as it being
Or
directly,
kids club, the medical daycare would be built through Medicaid.
It could be, right.
but not specifically
But not
through the
HCB.
waiver. Yeah.
Years ago, the county schools would contract with certain care providers like Child Development Center and Growing Together Preschool that had typical and special needs kids together for their Head Start program, but they brought that in-house, at least in Fayette County years ago. So that, but they used to do that. They would pay their daycare, whether, regardless, but that's been a long time on.
Let me speak to a quick point that you had made about budget, utilization there. In Michelle P. And HCB and required brain injury waivers, if you were to choose a blended plan or you choose consumer-directed options, services obviously taking place in home where you have employees in place, each person is allocated a certain dollar figure per year. Now, the state has to recognize that certain dollar figure specifically for that person and for no one else to utilize appropriately. Now, obviously, they're going to distribute that to employees, goods and services, maybe minor home adaptations, things like that. The Fed also recognizes that specific dollar figure for that person. It can't change lanes. So that dollar figure that, for your example, if it's $10,000, you utilize 9 of it. That $1,000 cannot go towards another specific person. That $1,000 in this example just simply goes back to the state and federal pool for allocations for next year. So during a time frame, it can't be spent over to someone else necessarily. It's just a specific allocation for that one person for that year.
Because I could come in at the last minute and want to use it, and then if they had
Right.
nicely given it to Caroline's family.
Right.
then it would've been
Which is a
it.
great thing to consider,
Yeah, I
but I think there's going to be a lot of room for error there
Yeah.
if that were to be the case. So.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So just to kind of follow up what you're saying, if you don't use all of your budget and the next year when they're planning their budget, will they look at the last year and say, well, you didn't use all of it, so
Right.
you use less this year?
Right. With the current standards of these 3 waivers I just mentioned, no, you have, if you're allocated $10,000 for what's called a level of care year, that could be from, let's say, April 2nd of this year to April 1st next year, then you would be given that same dollar figure the next year. So it doesn't actually weigh how much you spent, if you will, in this process. So.
It would just take a year for that $1,000 you didn't spend to go back into the pool to be by somebody else.
Well, right. I mean, that's going to be a dollar figure that's just going to be redistributed somehow in the following year, right? So.
All right. So to touch base about what do you do if you're having trouble accessing HCB services if you've met level of care for that waiver? Again, the first thing to do is going to be to contact your case manager. Again, give them time to work through issues and things like that. If you don't get anywhere, absolutely contact their supervisor. And if you're still having difficulties, then the state contacts for this particular waiver are Marilyn Ferguson and Greg Stratton. And so we've got their contact information here for you. And that concludes my presentation, what I had prepared, but we're happy to continue to do question and answer with you guys. What do you all still have questions about?
This is the part where I can relate, but for the Michelle P. waiver, I'm going to talk to them, and who do I contact?
That's going to be Bluegrass, and the number is 859-272-7483.
And Rachel, do you mind if I send your presentation out to everyone?
Oh
that's
yeah,
here?
absolutely.
I was gonna ask
Yeah.
that, actually, if you could email it or,
We'll send the PowerPoint and the document out.
Rachel?
Yes.
I do have a question. So I have a lot of families that, like right now, that are on the Michelle team, and they're really struggling with their case managers at Access, getting back with them or knowing answers to questions being asked, and they often me and go, can I switch to a different agency?
Because they signed something along the way saying that they were not allowed to. But I've always heard that you have a flexibility issue. Once you get the waiver, that you can go with whatever home health agency contracts with that waiver. But they're saying now that no, you can't.
No, all their freedom of choice is laid out in all of the waivers, and they are able to switch agencies at any point.
Okay. They have to go through Access to get Michelle
For
P,
Michelle
for the
P,
assessment.
for the
But
assessment
then once
portion.
they're in, they have the flexibility to switch.
Yes.
With the consumer-directed options portion of each of the waivers, you have the mental health centers and AAAs that are contracted by the state to perform those functions for those waivers. So that does limit your ability in terms of agency choice. However, the choice is still available to you. And as you saw with some of the choices there on the screen, you saw maybe a division of the counties, basically some territorial type thing. Know that it is possible to expand beyond those county boundaries. So if you were to go to CMHC and your ongoing services and you just there's something not right there. You go to the AAA, you experience the same thing. It is possible that you go to someone outside of your region to receive services. So say, for example, if you wanted to access Mountain Comp out of Prestonsburg, it's very possible they'd be willing to come out and serve you in your county. I'm not going to say that they would necessarily, because they're going to sit there and weigh, do I really want to travel an hour and a half for one consumer? But it's very possible that you could access another agency. Okay?
I'm sorry, what are the AAAs that you're referring to call that?
Sure.
The area agencies on aging.
Right. So area agencies on aging are very similar to the mental health centers, and they divide by a certain amount of counties across the state. As Rachel mentioned, with the mental health centers, there's about 14 that are participating in the CDO, and there's 15 total. There's also 15 area agencies on agency, all 15 of which participate in consumer directed. So they may not access a particular waiver that you're looking at. So that's something you have to consider there. Are they going to be a provider of, say, SCL or Michelle P, ABI? They all by default are HCB providers though. So just have to go to the agency and determine, hey, do you guys provide Michelle P CDO? And then they'll let you know. So yeah.
And I was running around back and forth, but you hit on what's the difference between CDO and traditional and all that at the beginning when I was running around.
Yeah.
So I just know, in just from personal experience, so I use Consumer Direct CDO for my child. So when you're talking about the AAAs, the area agencies, really they manage my pool of money. So we send timesheets into them, they issue the checks, they come by monthly to see how I'm doing, they give me my budget, and are mainly just to support. But, if you're doing consumer direct option, you're choosing who you want to work with your child or the individual you're taking care of. So they're more of a support in the money end of it, if that helps clarify.
Yeah, I would classify the role of a support worker as more administrative in function as opposed to a more traditional case manager. They're still going to come out and make that face-to-face contact, ask you about how things are going, manage the paperwork, so if you need to change providers or things like that. But in terms of, the responsibility for selecting employees, hiring folks, scheduling employees, things like that, the CDO gives you more flexibility, but it also gives you more responsibility in terms of directing the services. So. Other questions?
I think you've answered this as well. Michelle, do you want to know how long that takes? Is there a time or
The question was, do we know how long the Michelle P waiting list is? I don't have an exact figure. The last time that I called in and made an inquiry, I think it was about 3,000 to 4,000 that were on the wait list.
years maybe?
I definitely think that the expectation is that new slots will be allocated each year. But as far as exactly how many are going to be allocated or how quickly they are allocated, that's unclear.
That's really going to depend on legislators, congressmen, politicians as to how they can allocate funds towards that, because it's just a matter of what kind of money do they have to play with, unfortunately. So.
Legislature's in session right now, and this week is the deadline to file bills, so.
One of the reasons I mentioned that, if you have any sort of, if you're able to get anybody's ears, it might be a good idea to make a mention to somebody, so.
Absolutely.
Did you mention earlier though that the state has already exhausted the funds that they put toward it, so now all the funding is coming from
Well,
federal legislation, right?
Right. The dollar figure is, so for every dollar that is spent towards an individual, 70 cents of that dollar comes from the federal government, 30 cents comes from the state government. And right now, there's a certain dollar figure that would allocate for 10,000 slots possibly for the Michelle P. Waiver. Since those 10,000 slots have been eaten up, essentially the money has been eaten up for that allocation. So therefore, they need to basically make an application towards the feds for more slots, which they've done. That's where the 250 comes in for this year, 250 next year. So, they try to make some compromise with it, but again, speak to your legislators about trying to make more slots available to that, so that way they can create the funding for it as well.
Sure.
So.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions?
Okay. Thank you, Ellen. Wow, our office seems really small all of a sudden. I know this is a huge topic. I know it's overwhelming. I remember going through this with HCB, and I'll be real honest, the way I found out about HCB was after Emily had been in First Steps for like a year and a half. My speech therapist was like, so you're getting respite care, and I was like, what's respite care? And so that started the whole ball rolling. So we're just trying to be more proactive. It is overwhelming, but the best piece of advice I can give is don't give up. And you all can plug your ears, but I'm convinced as a consumer, as a taxpayer, it is designed for you to get frustrated and give up. I'm convinced of it. And I'm sorry, but y'all don't make the rules, but it's true. There's a lot of abbreviations, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of regulations, but it's a game changer. It truly is. Just from a personal experience, and I know other parents that have fought the good fight and gotten the waivers can attest to what a difference it does make in your life and in your loved one's life, and the opportunities it opens up. So that would be my one big piece of advice. We'll send this presentation out, and we'll send the links out. And the great thing is that now you have phone numbers, and I have phone numbers, and we have your all's names. Rachel is on our advisory committee, and we're so thankful to her. So I know that if you'll have questions, you can call them, you can contact me. I'll help see who I can get in touch with also. So it is a lot to take in, but they did a great job getting through it. They really, really did. I mean, to sift through that in an hour and a half is amazing. So keep at it. I'm going to do some shameless plugs. We've got World Down Syndrome Day coming up. We've got David Egan coming from Virginia. He's going to do a workshop for parents on Friday, March 20th. And then on the 21st is our big celebration. So you want to invite your therapist, your teachers, your grandparents, your nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, everybody. It's just a huge day of celebration, and we just have a great day together. So that's March 20th and March 21st. It's on our website calendar. In April, we're going to have someone come speak to us about health and nutrition and exercise. I'm really excited about this. It's a young lady that works with Human Development Institute named Lindsay Mullis. She has her degree in exercise science with a certificate in developmental disabilities. So what more could you ask for? And I've met with her, and she's really gung-ho about this. Our board had planning session Saturday. Lots of great things going on. We're going to start an art class. We're hoping to start an exercise class and a program called the Learning Program to help supplement education and things you can do at home to help supplement your child's education starting in as toddlers. So be on the lookout for all that. I thank you all for being here in person. I thank you all for being here on the webinar. I hope the webinar went well. I want your feedback. We really want this to work for our families that can't attend. So be safe traveling home, and I'll talk to you all later.
I noticed your brow furrowed several times when you were taking in the questions and the comments from people out here with their frustrations. Took you by surprise too. So